I spoke with some people yesterday, some dear friends, survivors of abuse of different forms, and this isolation that we're really forced to have right now is bringing a lot of anxiety to people. People who grew up in or lived in oppressive homes where their abusers isolated them from everybody else as a form of abuse is absolutely a cruel form of abuse. Those people right now are feeling some of those pangs of times past whenever they lived under intentional isolation at the hands of their abuser. We can understand the anxiety. We can understand why people are scared. But I also want to really emphasize the hope that we have in Jesus Christ. I feel like sometimes we miss the context in which Jesus was brought into this world in. Jesus was sent at a time where people were troubled. There was a lot of sickness, a lot of disease, a lot of poverty. If you think about the persecution, even Jesus' birth was wrought with persecution. King Herod ordered in Jesus' hometown that all the children ages 2 and younger were to be killed, and actually carried that through. That happened. If you can imagine the trouble and the anxiety that people felt in that first century time, if you could just take a snapshot of where people were when Jesus was born into this world, I think we would find a picture where people were scared. Think about the outcasts. We had the religious corruption, and all the people who should have been ministered to were actually the ones who were not welcomed into the synagogues. They were cast out. They were sent away. They were told that as long as you had impurities or diseases, or you were poor, or you were a beggar, or you were sick or lame or weak, you didn't belong. And so they kicked them out of the church. They kicked them out of the gatherings whenever the Jewish people would meet together. Those people, if you think about it, were not welcome in the temple. They were not welcome in the synagogues. They were not welcome to be among other Jewish friends and family because they were impure, they were unclean, and so they were the outcast of society, and there were a lot of them. So I think today, how do we think through this, and how do we process who Jesus is, and how do we find hope, and how do we give hope, and how do we let our lights shine in a world where there's so much trouble and so much anxiety? I just kind of browsed through social media, and I've really taken a big step back because there's so much shouting right now. And for me, personally, shouting is not helpful. When people are shouting other people down and saying, you should be doing this, and you need to be doing this, you have to be doing this, you need to avoid these people, you have to be doing this, and this person's evil, and this person's corrupt. When we hear that noise and that shouting, Jesus begins to get drowned out. And I look at Jesus' ministry and what he did and how he responded in a time where anxiety was really high. People were genuinely troubled, as they are today. People were genuinely troubled. People were hurting. They were legitimately hurting. People were suffering. People were sick. People were dying. People didn't have access to good health care because of poverty. Luke records that a woman had spent all that she had on a set of doctors, and she still was not well, and Jesus healed that woman. It was an issue. They didn't have socialized health care. Not everybody had access to it. You had to pay. And so there were people who were genuinely poor, legitimately sick, chronically ill, and they were kicked out of their religious communities because of it. So how did Jesus respond? What did Jesus call people to do? How did Jesus gather his disciples together? And what was the message when he sent them out? That's what we're going to look at today in today's sermon. And I love the way that Jesus did ministry because Jesus had this incredible compassion on people. Jesus didn't shout about the government. He didn't denounce whoever the emperor was at the time. He had a platform. He could have denounced the emperor by name. He could have said how corrupt, how evil, how awful he is. He could have said, all of you evangelical religious people who are following the emperor, how dare you? But he didn't do it. Jesus never even hints at the emperor. Instead, what does Jesus do? Jesus goes out and he finds people who are hurting and he gives them hope. Last week we talked about how Luke pieces together these stories throughout his gospel, and he really does that from start to finish, and it's intentional. He puts the order of the stories in a proper order where it paints this bigger picture and it tells a story. And Luke is telling a story, and so we have to kind of focus back and say, what is the story that Luke is trying to tell? In chapter 8 of Luke, he starts going through and he talks about this story of this man who was healed with a demon. If you were here during class, this is that story. There's this demonic man. He's full of all of these demons. Jesus asks what his name is. In verse 30 of chapter 8, Jesus then asked him, "What is your name?" And he said, "Legion, for many demons had entered him." And they begged him, that is Jesus, not to command them to depart into the abyss. Now a large herd of pigs was feeding there on the hillside, and they begged him to let them enter these. So he gave them permission. Then the demons came out of the man and entered the pigs, and the herd rushed down the steep bank into the lake and drowned. Then when the herdsmen saw what had happened, they fled and told it in the city and in the country. The people went out to see what had happened, and they came to Jesus and found the man from whom the demons had gone, sitting at the feet of Jesus, clothed and in his right mind. And they were afraid. And those who had seen it told them how the demon-possessed man had been healed. Then all the people of the surrounding country of the Gerasenes asked him to depart from them, for they were seized with great fear. So he got into the boat and returned, and the man from whom the demons had gone out begged that he might be with him, but Jesus sent him away, saying, "Return to your home and declare how God has done for you." And he went away proclaiming throughout the whole city how much Jesus had done for him. Here's this really incredible, powerful story where this one man who was full of all of these demons had superhuman strength. I can't even begin to imagine how loud and obnoxious this was. I don't have a picture up for the screen, but the place where this happened is on a cliff that overlooks the Sea of Galilee, and it's kind of cut out as a natural amphitheater. So when this guy was yelling and screaming day and night, that sound would have echoed across the lake, and it would have reverbed back on the shore for all the people who lived in that area. They would have heard his voice ring out and echo, and it would have been this eerie, loud, frightening, terrifying sound. Jesus finds this man. He intentionally goes to the man. He addresses the demons. He casts them out, and this man is found sitting at the feet of Jesus for the first time probably in his life. The man is in his right mind, and he's sitting at the feet of Jesus worshiping. You see, Jesus doesn't feed into fear. He confronts it. And he confronts evil, and he casts it out. Jesus didn't get on, he didn't get on a soapbox and start yelling about how, those evil demons are taking over the world, and, look around and look at how corrupt these evil demons are, and look at all the people that they're entering into. Jesus didn't do it. He simply went out, he healed people, and I love what he did with this man, because instead of allowing the man to follow Jesus, which he was begging to do, Jesus said, "No, go home and be with your family." It's an extreme act of compassion. Luke then spills into this story, which is really a double story. He heals a woman and he heals Jairus' daughter. Verse 40 of chapter 8, "Now when Jesus returned, the crowd welcomed him, for they were all waiting for him. And there came a man named Jairus, who was a ruler of the synagogue. And falling at Jesus' feet, he implored him to come to his house, for he had an only daughter, about 12 years of age, and she was dying. As Jesus went, the people pressed around him. Now there was a woman who had a discharge of blood for 12 years, and though she had spent all her living on physicians, she could not be healed by anyone. She came up behind him, and she touched the fringe of his garment, and immediately her discharge of blood ceased. Jesus said, "Who was it that touched me?" When they all denied it, Peter said, "Master, the crowd surround you and are pressing in on you." But Jesus said, "Someone touched me, for I perceive that power has gone out from me." And when the woman saw that she was not hidden, she came trembling and falling down before him, declared in the presence of all the people why she had touched him and how she had been immediately healed. And he said to her, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace." You see, I think he called this woman out not to call her out, not to shame her, not to embarrass her, but he said, "Who touched my garment?" Because he wanted people to see the power and the compassion. That Jesus is a healer, that Jesus didn't go out and just, start yelling and shouting and calling people down. Jesus just went out and he healed people. And I think about Jairus, right? Jairus, if you didn't catch that, he's the ruler of a synagogue. This guy has power. He's probably one of the religious leaders who cast people out of his synagogues. He would be the one to make a decision to tell people, you know what, you're kind of unclean, you're not welcome to come to the synagogue. And I really shudder to think of the amount of people likely who are to be turned away by Jairus. So Jesus comes, and when Jairus falls down at Jesus' feet because he was desperate, he was scared, he was desperate, his daughter was dying, Jesus didn't say, "You know what, you're one of those people who leads the synagogue. You're a synagogue ruler, and you need to go away. And first you need to confess your sins, and you need to repent." Jesus didn't do that. In that moment, Jesus exercises extreme compassion on the man. And he goes to the house. He physically goes to the house, and he heals this little girl. She actually had died, and Jesus brought her back to life because that's who Jesus is. And so I think about Jesus' 12 apostles. When Jesus called this group together, 12 people, if you think about that. Think about all the yelling and crying and moaning that we do. Oh, we don't have enough time. We don't have enough money. We don't have enough resources. And we're constantly trying to get more money and trying to get more resources and get more professionalism. And, we talked about that last week. Churches have become addicted to hiring professional ministers and other leaders to do their work. And we've really kept pushing this bar up where we want to be the biggest and the best and the most powerful. And we want to brag about how many resources we have. That's the American church right now in a lot of respects. Not all of them are that way. I certainly would never make that argument. But a lot of them are. And you get things like what we see just, I think this was 2 days ago. Julia Roys, who was a reporter, had an email that was leaked to her from a mega church in Chicago. This is a church of 6,000 people. They had several of their staff come down and test positive with the coronavirus. And they sent this blast out, this email blast to all the staff, telling them, you do not tell anybody that this happened. Julie Roys received those emails. They were leaked out. And so she wrote an article about this megachurch, that this is how they care for their people, quote unquote. This is how they care for their people. They lie. They tell the rest of their staff to lie about it, to say, don't you dare tell people, don't leak this out that some of our staff have come down and tested positive with it. Guys, that's not compassion. That's not who Jesus is. And so Jesus, I look at his methodology and how he spread the gospel news to the known world at the time. I mean, you want to talk about something that was infectious in a good way. The gospel of Jesus spread like wildfire. How did he do it? Jesus picked 12 people, and I often say it's the most bizarre group of 12 people, because these 12 people really clashed. You had some zealots. If you know anything about zealots, they're the ones who cannot shut their mouths. They're zealots because they're zealous. They shout a lot. And they want to convince people that their way is the right way. And so he had some zealots, he had some Pharisees, he had some Sadducees. He gets this mix of these misfits, people who are not professional religious people. They were fishermen, they were tax collectors, they were people from a wide array of different positions. Jesus gathers all these people together, the most crazy group of people. He puts them together and he says, okay, we're going to go out and we're going to do this thing. How did he do it? The very next story in Luke begins in chapter 9 and verse 1, and this is what was read to us this morning. And he called the 12 together and gave them power and authority over all demons and to cure diseases. And he sent them out to proclaim the kingdom of God and to heal. And he said to them, take nothing for your journey, no staff, nor bag, nor bread, nor money, and do not have 2 tunics. In whatever house you enter, stay there, and from there depart. And wherever they do not receive you, when you leave that town, shake off the dust from your feet as a testimony against them. Period. And they departed and went through the villages, preaching the gospel and healing everywhere. I love Jesus' mission to his disciples. Because essentially, you know what he was saying? Jesus was saying, your mission is my mission. My mission, he spells it out in Luke chapter 4, when Jesus gets up in the synagogue and he pulls out the scroll of Isaiah, he unrolls it, he reads from it, and he says that he's sent to go out and to feed people who are hungry, to clothe people, to set at liberty those who are captives, to set at liberty those who are under oppression. That's Jesus' mission. Jesus' mission wasn't to prove a point. It wasn't to prove that he was right and other people are wrong. It wasn't to shout people down who followed the emperor. It wasn't to point at government leaders and talk about how corrupt they were. And believe me, they were corrupt. There was so much corruption throughout the Roman Empire. There was so much persecution, and Jesus didn't focus on that. He focused on people who were sick, who were outcasts, and he reached into their lives, and he just served. And he tells his disciples, take nothing with you. And I really think he did that so that they wouldn't become conceited and say, well, look at how much we have. We have all these resources, and, to the synagogue across town, it's easy to do that. It's easy to do things like what this megachurch in Chicago did just a couple days ago, where they send this email blast out, telling their staff to lie to the entire congregation and not disclose that any of them came down with the coronavirus. You get things like that when you get really big. Not always, but oftentimes. So Jesus tells his disciples, just go out, have faith, and have compassion on people. I'm giving you the power to do that. I'm giving you the power and the authority to cast out demons and to gather up people who are the outcasts and to offer compassion to them. Just go out, tell them that the kingdom is near, and bless their lives. So my message to you is to go out and to do the same. Right now, there are people who are hurting. There are people who are struggling. There are people who are scared. There are people who are really, really hurting economically. There are people who are hungry. There are people who are being overlooked. There are people who are religious outcasts. There are people who are struggling in every aspect of their life. Go out, find those people, which is not hard to do, and bless them. One of the things that my wife is talking about in our home is she keeps coming up with ideas and thinking of ways that we can bless people, that we can involve our children and bless people in the community. Do this as a family. Teach your kids the value of worth, that people are worthy of respect. They're worthy of your time. They're worthy of your commitment. They're worthy of your phone calls. They're worthy of your cards that you send. Last week, we signed several cards and sent those cards out to several of our church members who they're shut in, they're quarantined. Some are sick, some are not, but we sent these cards out, and I received multiple messages this past week from people just thanking us for taking the time to sign cards and to mail them out. People are legitimately hurting right now, so find them. Bless them. That's the heart of Jesus' mission. It's not about doing big church. It's not about getting all this money coming in. It's not about building resources. It's about washing feet. It's about serving people and asking nothing in return. I don't know how many of you are struggling today. There may be some of you who've not yet decided to become a Christian, to put Christ on in baptism. I know we're social distancing right now, but we can make that happen. We can find ways to do that in a safe manner, and we would encourage you, if you're on the fence and thinking about it, we would encourage you to make that decision. For those who are struggling and need prayer, our elders have been very vocal that they're available. Go on our website. You can look up our elders on our church website and get their emails and just ask them to pray for you. If you have specific prayer needs, ask our elders. We are here to serve. We're socially distanced, sure, but we're not sitting twiddling our thumbs. We're ready to serve. And we call you to serve as well. Find your neighbor and serve them this week. We ask that everybody join us in song. We're going to put up a song here and worship in song, and then we're going to break bread together and take communion.